welcome to the Workplace Violence Prevention Plan live Q&A session. Today's brought to you by us at CEA and in partnership with our safety partners over at Safety Center. So my name is Anna Manzano. I'm the digital media and event strategist here at the California Employers Association. So as you probably see, your audio is going to be muted for today's presentation. You're doing an awesome job interacting in the chat. We love to see that engagement. But if you're joining us today with questions, as I'm sure you possibly are, the best place to enter those are going to be in the Q&A box. If you're on a desktop, it's going to be along the bottom row. You'll see two bubbles, Q&A. That's going to be the best place because then we can track your transcript, and I'll be sending that out by the end of the day. So we have some of our expert HR directors here today in the chat who will be answering your questions and providing you with links to additional resources. So definitely look for the Q&A report in the email that I'll send you by end of day, kind of wrapping everything up for you. Today, we have CEA's HR Director, Eli Nunez here, and we are joined by a couple of Safety Center's instructor extraordinaires. We have Bill Petrie and Steve Brown. And moderating for today's panel of experts is our own HR Compliance Director, Juliana Gabriel. Juliana, I will let you take it over from here.
Thank you, Anna. Good afternoon, everyone. We're very excited for this event. We have a packed house today, and we are ready to get your questions answered. So how this is going to work, we're going to start off with some content on the Workplace Violence Prevention Plan requirements at kind of a higher level, get the juices flowing, and then we will jump into FAQs, including taking your questions live. As Anna mentioned, we also have our HR advisors that are going to be in that Q&A box and directly responding to questions as well. Since we have hundreds of you on with us today, we want to get to as many questions as possible. That's a really great reminder that if you're a CEA member, you can always call into us with your questions and get a live HR advisor such as Eli or myself on the phone. So you can call in Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 and ask your questions. We also have that Workplace Violence Prevention Plan Toolkit available for our members. So make sure you download that and use those resources to put your plan together and administer it going forward. All right, so who is California Employers Association, or CEA? For those of you joining us for the first time, we are an HR consulting company. We have members located throughout the state of California and beyond, and our focus is on providing employers peace of mind with HR compliance solutions. So I already mentioned, if you join as a member, you get that unlimited phone support with us. You also get access to all of our sample forms, policies, fact sheets. We're constantly keeping those up to date with all of California's changes. We can also help you out with services. So whether that's a customized employee handbook, training for your supervisors or managers, or even day-to-day HR functions. We have a great HR Assist program if you need that level of support. So please visit our website at employers.org. You can also just give us a call and we'd be happy to speak with you about the various options. I do want to note that this presentation today is for educational purposes only and should not be relied upon as legal advice. So a couple things there. We are going off of the information that is currently available to us. So that is the language in the labor code, some FAQs from Cal OSHA and other resources, but that information may be subject to change. So Cal OSHA has until December 31, 2026 to formally adopt their own regulation. So we may see additional clarification, including in the form of additional FAQs in the coming months. So we're going off of the information as we currently have it. And also we are going over general best practices. It's important to remember that your plan should be customized to your business, your individual work areas and operations. And if you need some support through that, we encourage you to consult legal counsel or a safety expert. And so with that, we want to remind you about Safety Center. They have been around since 1934, and they can help you out with your customized workplace violence prevention plans, as well as the employee training. They can help you check off that requirement. And we're going to be speaking with some of those instructors today. So I've flashed up their contact information here. You see their phone and email address, so don't hesitate to contact them as well. All right, so let's start with our little bit of content. As many of you know, SB 553 passed last year, and it created this brand new requirement for employers to establish, implement, and maintain, meaning going forward, a written workplace violence prevention plan by the July 1, 2024 deadline. So we are a little less than a month away, but you have time to get in compliance with that. This is the first general industry workplace violence standard in the nation. So California is really a trendsetter on this, and it applies to almost every private and public employer in California. The bill was codified at Labor Code Section 6401.9, which means that it is fully enforceable as of July 1. So even though Cal OSHA has more time to adopt its regulation, they have the ability to enforce it because it has passed, it's under the Labor Code. There are very limited exceptions. So if there's a takeaway on exceptions is that they are very narrow in terms of who this does not apply to. So to just kind of briefly cover those, the healthcare industry has had its own requirement for a number of years to have a workplace violence prevention plan. So certain healthcare employers are exempt because they're already covered by their own standard and employers that follow that standard. There's also some exceptions for certain law enforcement agencies, prisons, remote employees. So for employees that are fully remote, they're at a location of their choosing that's not controlled by the employer, they would fall under an exemption. But be really careful with that one. If you have hybrid workers, you have people coming on site, even occasionally, or meeting at client site, they likely would not fall under that exemption. We also have what we're going to call the small employer exemption. So for places of employment with less than 10 employees at any given time that are not accessible to the public and that have a compliant IIPP, they would also be exempt. We're going to expand upon that one in a little bit because we know that we have been receiving a lot of questions from members on what that exemption could mean. I also want to cover the types of workplace violence because it's important to understand, well, what is the purpose of this plan? What types of hazards are we trying to mitigate? And it's also important because we have to code the type of violence on our violent incident log every time we have an incident in our workplace. So type 1 is when there is no legitimate business interest by the perpetrator. So this is typically a stranger coming to commit a crime. An example would be someone coming to hold up a bank. That would be an example of type 1. Type 2 is when it's done by a customer, client, or patient. So an example would be if a disgruntled customer shoves one of your employees. That would be an example of type 2. Type 3 is when it's done by a current or former employee or supervisor. So it's someone that has a working relationship or had one. And so that could be one employee sexually harassing another. That oftentimes would fall under the definition of workplace violence. And then type 4 would be when the perpetrator has a personal relationship with the employee. So typically when domestic violence or intimate partner violence spills into the workplace. An example would be that someone calls their partner up at work and makes a threat against them, a threat of violence. That would be an example of type 4. Now let's talk about your key requirements at a high level. What do we need to focus on by July 1 and then going forward? So number 1 is creating your written plan. We would recommend that you use Cal OSHA's template. They have a template that addresses the 12 different requirements under SB 553. And so that'll be a great roadmap for you. Take a first stab at that. Try to complete it as much as you can and then note what are the areas that you need to follow up on. You also need to solicit employee, and if you have a union feedback in developing and implementing your plan. You need to conduct at least annual employee training, schedule periodic inspections and hazard corrections, investigate workplace violence incidents, and then we have certain record keeping requirements, including this violent incident log that I referred to. So Cal OSHA does have some FAQs on this that were released in March, and so we do encourage you to read those in addition to the labor code. So some threshold issues. You're going to want to decide who are going to be responsible for your plan. You're going to want to designate your WVPP administrators, and you would want to refer to these people by name or job title in your plan. And so if you're a smaller business, you might decide, well, we're just going to have one administrator. Maybe that's our safety manager or the owner of the business. If you're mid-size or larger, you might decide, well, we're going to have a few administrators. We'll have somebody that's overall responsible, but then we might delegate, one person's responsible for hazard inspections. Another person's going to be responsible for the employee trainings and safety meetings. So again, you can use Cal OSHA's model written plan to incorporate all of the requirements. Once it's drafted, an owner or management would approve, sign, and date it. And then the key is you want to make sure it's accessible to all employees and authorized representatives, as well as any Cal OSHA representative upon request. So we've received the question, well, can we post it electronically on a shared drive? That would be okay if all of your employees regularly have access to computers. But if you're in a more traditional environment, blue collar environment where they don't, then you would want to consider printing it out, posting it in a break room where you have other employee notices, maybe placing it in work trucks. Make sure that all employees have easy access to it. And then the key here is that this is not something that we're just completing in 2024 and then we tuck away, put it on a shelf and never look at it again. There are ongoing requirements, including periodic review of the plan at least annually, and anytime there is a new hazard or incident. We also have to involve employees in that annual review by soliciting employee feedback each year, in addition to the annual employee training. All right, so I know I've kind of thrown a lot at you, but I want to give a chance for our safety experts to go over their background and training on mitigating workplace violence. And so Bill, Steve, we'd love to hear from you here before we jump into our questions.
Yeah, hi. In the interest of getting to your questions as quickly as possible, I'll just tell you that I've spent over 20 years in the insurance industry and the insurance fraud industry. That gave me a unique perspective to workplace violence, just working in the corporate environment and doing investigations. For the past 15 years, I've been a private investigator and an executive protection agent, and I've run my own workplace violence active shooter response training company. This has allowed me to partner with safety centers so that we can assist in trying to provide a safe workplace for employers to provide and for employees to go to. At the end of the day, from being in the public and private sector, what I've learned is that all of us want to have a safe place to work, right? And we all want to be safe and go home at the end of the day. And that's what we're here to do today.
Thank you. That's really helpful to know your background. I'm sure we're going to get some questions on that employee training. So I now want to turn it over to Eli to expand upon that small employer exemption that we were referring to. So can you give us kind of some examples of that, Eli?
Absolutely. Thank you, Juliana. You touched on this a little bit in the beginning too. You have to make sure if you are going to qualify for this exemption or you think you do, that you meet all the requirements. The first one, as you mentioned, was having less than 10 employees working there at any given time. So in other words, if you have an office with 20 desks there, but only 3 people show up at a time, but you have the potential to have 10 or more people there, then this exemption would not fit for you as well. The other thing is it has to not be accessible to the public. And this is one that we've gotten some questions on as well. What does that mean? Does having just a lock on the door count? Does having a, key card access count, that sort of thing? And the answer to that is maybe. We're still waiting to get those FAQs and that direct guidance to see what exactly that means to be not accessible to the public. And of course, have that qualifying IEPP. So some good examples of this, of when it would fit and would not fit. Say, for instance, you have a small coffee shop, or, given how it's 110 in Sacramento today or whatever it is, a small ice cream shop, and you only have 3 employees. So you'd think, well, I have less than 10, so maybe this qualifies, right? Not so fast, because if you are open, if you have the public coming in to purchase from you, this exemption wouldn't qualify. Even though you have less than the 10 people, the public still has access to you, so you would still have to abide by these rules. The other one is, if you have a remote workforce, and some of us at CA, this kind of fits us a little bit too. A lot of us work remotely or hybrid, so we're not always in the office. However, there is the potential that we could all be there, say for a meeting, an event, or a training or something like that. At that point, since there is the potential for more than 10 of us to be there at any given time, that would nullify us from meeting that exemption. So again, just examine your situation, see if the public has access to you, and how many employees can be present at any given time. That's what's going to really be the deciding factor as far as whether you qualify for that exemption or not.
Yeah, we've gotten that question from employers. They say, well, what about if it's infrequently that we're all meeting and then we go over 10? And that language is pretty clear. It's at any given time. So then you're going to want to have a plan. You probably don't fall under that exemption.
Yeah, any given time, there's the potential. If you do it once a year, once every 2 years, whatever it is, the potential is there for you to have more than 10 people gathered. So get that plan.
I'm also going to take a question from the audience. So someone said, we have 5 locations in California. Do we need to have 5 different plans, one specific to each location? What's the guidance on that?
Is that place of employment, right? So we're looking at each place of employment, each location, as far as whether it qualifies, or whether you're going to need one for that place. So I would say you look at each place of employment individually. Now, if you have people that go back and forth to different locations, obviously you have to look at it as a whole. But if you have, a set location where only 3 people always report to one location, and there's only 3 there, that's kind of how you would approach that. What are your thoughts on that, Juliana?
Yeah, and then in terms of the number of plans, so this FAQ, Cal OSHA released one on it that said employers have to make sure they're addressing hazards for each individual work area and operation. And so you may decide that you include everything in one plan. I probably wouldn't recommend that because your different site locations are going to look very different in terms of how do we evacuate? What kind of engineering controls do we have at this site location? So we would highly recommend that you have separate plans for each site location, although Cal OSHA hasn't explicitly said that that is a requirement. All right, so moving on to our next question. I'm sure a lot of employers fit into this category. I'm just tackling or just starting my plan. I don't know where to begin. Where should I start first? So just kind of some practical advice here.
Well, I think 600 of you that signed up for this are off to a good start, right? Getting some information on what you need. But really, one of the first steps is getting that employee feedback or employee representative feedback if you're in the union environment. Because really, since that is a required part of the WVPP, you want to make sure that you're giving them the opportunity to make those suggestions and point things out to you. Obviously, after that, take a look at all the resources out there, whether it's the Cal OSHA template, FAQs, and the information out there, and plan to see if you are going to take a shot at building the plan yourself, or if you're going to partner with somebody else, like our partners that are on here with Safety Center that can help you out as far as developing that plan and identifying anything. So really, the first thing, if I would start with anything, get that feedback from employees, employee representatives, take a look at the resources, and then decide if you are going to be the one building that plan, or if you're gonna, partner with somebody else to help with that. And of course, once you get that going, start calendaring things for the future. Because like you said, Juliana, this is a living document, right? It's not just a one and done. So we have to revisit it, every year or sooner. Make sure we have trainings, make sure we have meetings and that sort of thing. So start doing that.
Great point. Yeah, calendaring, I think that's going to get missed by a lot of employers, that they don't actually put those mechanisms into place to help remind them, because it's going to be easy to forget, and those annual requirements are going to come up quickly. So that's a great point. So just expanding on that a little bit more, yes, there is a requirement to obtain the active involvement of employees and authorized representatives in both developing and maintaining the plan. And there's 3 specific areas where you need to solicit feedback. That's on mitigating hazards, employee reporting, and topics for the employee training. So they actually get to have an input or a say into what goes into that training. So they might say, I would love to learn about active shooter drills or de-escalation, do an evacuation drill. So make sure that you're actually considering and incorporating those suggestions into your plan in a meaningful way. And you can go about this in a number of ways. You could send an anonymous employee survey. If you're a CEA member, we have the employee survey ready to go in our toolkit. So you can use those questions and send them out. Holding safety meetings, that could be all hands, or it could be by department, and have conversations, get feedback, take notes, or even sending an email out and asking employees to respond with their suggestions. So there's a number of different ways that you can accomplish that. So Bill, we would like to hear from you. I know this question is already coming up in our Q&A. For those employers that frequently work with other employers or vendors, what are some of the things they can do to coordinate their plan with those other businesses?
Well, I'm going to start off by just saying the stuff that's local, and then I'm going to defer to Steve here on some of this. But beginning locally, once you have your plan in place and you're going to conduct certain drills And we'll use an evacuation drill as an example. You want to coordinate with everybody in the building that's around you, and you want to do that simply so that there's no miscommunication. You want to let vendors know in advance, hey, we're going to be conducting training on a particular day at a particular time. I think a lot of companies who are having supplies, parts trucked into the building, and they have personnel walking through the building and trying to gain access, you don't want to run into a drill going on at the time without actually knowing about it. And then Steve, would you jump in there for a minute?
Yeah, this is Steve Brown. I'm an instructor with Safety Center myself, and I'll just give you a little background of me. I was a lineman with Southern California Edison, went to school at night, got my master's, ended up being the principal director for corporate safety, and then also after that became a director for a electrical contractor for the West Coast. And then also I've been through a incident with Edison, and so that's kind of my background briefly. But to go along with what Bill was saying is that you have to determine the exposure of your other businesses that might be on your location and what their exposure might be. If they're working, on the perimeter of your location and it's not really a concern, but if somebody's going to be working inside your facility, you would benefit from sharing with them some of your philosophies and also your work plan, not the whole workplace violence prevention plan, but the key points on what your exits are, how to get out of the location, and what your mode of communicating with other employees, whether it be, say you put in a sound system that emits a certain sound indicating that there's a hazard present in the workplace and you need to get out. Say it's a long beeping sound that the employees would know. You need to share that with your businesses too that are on the property that know what that means. That if there's a long beeping sound, that means that there's a hazard in the building, you need to get out now. So things like that, you should share with other businesses that are on your property.
And any additional insight for staffing agencies? We've been getting a lot of questions on, well, how do we coordinate that when we send our employees to another company? Any additional insight on that? This question's up for grabs for anyone here.
Let me, as an opportunity for us of an incident that happened with us, is that when I talk about a sound, it brings to mind that we were in a safety meeting and there was a quacking sound coming over the speakers. It was just quack, quack, quack. And we didn't know what that was. And we had our display up and we were going over our communication with each other. And then we found out over the speaker system a few minutes later that they said that the fire alarm was actually set off by mistake. And so we found out that their fire alarm was a quacking sound, and we didn't know it. And so I would suggest that if you go to another facility, by all means, ask them, because now this is going to be in place after July 1st. Everybody has to have this in place. I would ask them if there's any unique communication and where their exits are. Similar to when you stay at a hotel and you look at the door, at the sign behind the door, I highly recommend that you always get in the habit of looking at that sign just to see where the exit is in case there was a fire and smoke filled the area, you know where the exits are. Things like that. Yeah, absolutely. Talk to them about where the exits are and if they have any unique sound system for notifying employees of a hazard.
And Juliana, just to address your question in the terms of coordination, I've gone to a large quite large temporary employment agency in Georgia to conduct active shooter response training. And one of the things that impressed me about that company is they had designated public safety officials that were flown in to the headquarters for the training. And I learned at all of their locations dispatched employees, and those public safety officers were responsible for equipping employees sent to another location to work to understand if there were any drills being conducted that day, if there were going to be any special trainings they needed to either attend prior to working for that company or after they got involved there. So I think whether you have a public safety official as an employer that can disseminate that information, or whether or not you designate somebody else, it's important to let those employees know what's to be expected when they get to that other location.
Those are really great points. Just the things that you don't even think are going to maybe come up for people, like the
Exactly.
quacking sound. And I think also some additional advice or guidance could be if you're a staffing agency, maybe you require that your clients give you a copy of their plan, and you know that their employees have been trained on that plan. And if there is going to be an incident, that they assure you and they're going to report to you what's happened, and that you have communication channels for doing that so you can stay in the loop. And that's also a requirement that they would share that data from the violent incident log. So it's having kind of just that level of coordination and checking in. It doesn't mean that you're responsible for their plan, but you do want to coordinate and have those communication channels open. Okay, so moving right along, I know we've gotten some questions already on employee reporting and training requirements, so we're probably going to spend some time here. But just to go over this at a high level, we want to make sure that we have a way for employees to report not only workplace violence, but also related concerns or hazards. So for example, there is a door that's not shutting or locking properly, or there's someone suspicious loitering in our parking lot. We want to, or red flag, someone's exhibiting red flag behaviors. You think that their behavior is erratic. We want employees to know, we want to train employees that we want to hear about these concerns so we can get in front of them. So it's important from the outset, you decide who's going to be responsible for receiving these complaints. So for example, is it going to be your HR manager? Are you going to designate all your supervisors the responsibility? And then is this the same person who's going to be responsible for investigating those reports and engaging in corrective action and follow-up? So make sure that that's very clear. If you're a larger business, you might decide we're going to have our supervisors be responsible. We're going to train them to escalate these concerns up to HR or management, and then HR takes over and investigates, for example. That could be one way to do it. You're also going to want to consider alternative reporting channels. You want to be thinking about worst case scenarios. If you've said to report to the HR manager if there's an incident, and that HR manager is out that day, they're on a leave, they're on vacation, you want to make sure it's really clear who's the next person that I go to if I don't get a hold of that HR manager. We need to initially train our employees by July 1. So I've seen that question a number of times in the Q&A, and yes, that is the requirement. OSHA has also clarified that in their FAQs, and then it's on a yearly basis. So we're always going to have to do this yearly, similar to harassment prevention. That's every 2 years. This is every year. So it's going to come up even faster. And then anytime there is a new hazard identified, or you've made a change to your plan. So even if there's not necessarily an incident, but let's say someone unauthorized gained access to your building and you looked into that, and maybe an employee badged them in when they weren't supposed to. Maybe you need additional training. Maybe you need to change certain procedures, and then you're going to train employees on what are those processes or protocols. How have you addressed that hazard in your plan? So I do have a couple questions on the training requirements. So someone said, I've seen a number of trainings that are online on demand for employees. Are these likely to be compliant? Eli, can you take this one for us from an HR perspective?
Oh yeah, that could be a stretch. I mean, as far as the trainings go, you want them to be directed at the employees and their specific situation. So it's almost like you want to have it be interactive where they can ask questions. So there's a possibility that you can maybe have those pre-recorded or those set trainings that you play for your employees, but someone has to be there to answer any questions, any concerns, or anything that comes up live during the training itself.
Right. So it has to be specific to your plan, has to be by someone knowledgeable. And like you've mentioned, that opportunity for interactive questions by someone who's knowledgeable in your plan. So that could be a WVPP administrator, a safety consultant that's reviewed your plan, your legal counsel that's reviewed your plan. So it is very unlikely that an online on demand, I don't think in any circumstances would it be fully compliant. You could use it to supplement your
Absolutely.
training. But yes, you would not want to rely completely on an on-demand course.
Yeah, you can use it for certain topics if you want to talk about maybe you have a training on de-escalation, a training on reporting, anything like that. You can use it as part of your program, but not rely on it completely.
Another question's come up for new hires. Is it required that we train new hires in this plan?
They're employees, absolutely. Soon, make
Yeah.
that part of your onboarding. As soon as they're getting on there, their first day, make that part of the onboarding plan. Make sure they're trained up on it. Make sure they know the right reporting procedures. Make sure they know, what to do in case of any of these situations.
Yeah, so 553 doesn't explicitly, or I should say the labor code 640 1.9 doesn't explicitly say that training's required for new hires. I haven't seen an FAQ from Cal OSHA on this, but we would still recommend it. We want to educate our people. We want them to be knowledgeable if a workplace violence incident happens, the following week. We want to show that at onboarding, we've given them some level of training. It doesn't need to be in the same format as long as you're meeting all of the requirements of what you need to cover. And that could be even conversational in nature. Bill, Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
That's a good point. The employee, it's almost like saying, at what point do they become an employee? As soon as they, sign the contract or show up at your work, they become an employee. So they are covered as training employees. So that's kind of how I look at it. And it should be done with all the other training that should be done when you're onboarding an employee.
Yeah, I would just agree with Steve, and I really I'm impressed with the conversation that Eli brought it up right away. Yeah, absolutely, train them today and make it part of the onboarding process. I think that if you do that, then it's streamlined, it's built in, and you've already got it covered.
So we have a question on, is active shooter training a requirement of 553? And it's not, but I know a lot of employers are choosing to offer that. So Bill, I know you have a heavy background in this. What would you say are the pros and cons? Or for you, is it all pro to have an active shooter training?
Yeah, thank you. Well, as you might suspect, I'm going to say, yeah, it's always imperative that you include it. Here's why I'm going to say that. Most common question I get is, or a comment that I will get from an employer is, well, some of my people have already been through several different trainings, and they'll name several different companies, and there are several good ones out there. So my question for feedback is always, how many of those employees still work here? When was the training last conducted? What do they remember about the training? There's a big trend in the industry now to go to some publicly funded, so sheriff's departments in local cities, who will come in and they will help a company check the box insurance-wise. And this isn't to disparage it, but the training will consist of 45 minutes to an hour on a piece of the active shooter response. So situational awareness, for an example. Well, my response to that doesn't help anybody when the incident really happens. And then people are in a state of crisis and they need to be able to know what their emergency evacuation plan is. They need to know how to apply a tourniquet, for example. They need to know how to evacuate the building and where all the exits are, and how that's going to affect them physically. Without that training, I personally feel that you've lost a critical piece that can be not only emotionally damaging, but damaging to the business long term. Because and we can talk about this later, but there are aspects to training in general that if you don't cover them, they have a hidden cost that we don't normally talk about.
Mm-hmm. So your advice would be it's generally a good idea to cover that and account for worst case scenario.
And there's ways that it can be shaped to your program in your company where perhaps each month you train one piece of it. If you just think about schools, how many times a year does a school conduct a fire drill, for example? And why do they do that? Well, they do it so that when it actually happens, and in California here, we get a lot of earthquake evacuations too. We have to get a lot of earthquake training. It's best if the training has already happened and people have it in their muscle memory and they can respond to it and stay safe.
Mm-hmm. Right, because it's going to be a panic if it's, of course, a first time situation.
Absolutely.
Right. So we have some additional questions. Some are kind of fun. So on animal attack, someone asked if we can elaborate on what that could look like. I haven't seen a ton of guidance on that, but I know that there's a FAQ from Cal OSHA that addresses that. Yes, it would apply to vets, dog boarding, that they would need to log all of those animal, bites. Certainly, I don't know. There's probably some gray area on what would qualify as an animal attack. But also, if that's not your business model, if you're sending someone out and they happen to get, bitten by a dog running out to get lunch or whatever, then we need to put that on the violent incident log. So yes, that it does apply. And, whether your business deals with pets or furry friends or not. Eli, anything else you want to elaborate? We got a question on, does a bee sting count?
I mean, I think it just comes down to mitigating risk for your employees, right? So if, say for example, you have an employee that is going out to throw garbage away in the dumpster and there's, raccoons or something out there and they get attacked by it, that's probably a risk that your business should be addressing. So yes, you do have to record that and you look up for ways to keep your employees safe is the way I would approach it, right? So if it's something that happens, make a record of it and, use that as a tool to find ways to prevent it from happening in the future and keeping your employees safe.
I agree. Okay, some other questions. Do we need to incorporate every single employee suggestion that we receive?
Not every single one. I'm sure there's some good ones out there. I'm sure there's some gems. I'm sure there's some that aren't really gems, but you just basically want to use common sense, right? The reason that we're asking our employees and everybody out there for suggestions is because they're the ones out on the floor. They're the ones dealing with this, on a first-hand basis. So take the suggestions, see what's possible, and, see what you can integrate, see what makes sense to integrate. So no, you don't have to include everything, but make sure you consider everything and, examine everything critically to see if it's something that fits in the overall picture of what you want to do, or if it's just so completely out of left field that there's no room for it.
I completely agree. So I would keep documentation of proof that you gave everyone the opportunity to participate, that you meaningfully considered those responses and in good faith incorporated what you could. But some responses might even be contradictory to one another or just not within the budget. So just keep good records, show that you made a good faith attempt and that you have meaningfully incorporated something, right? It's important that you've done something. And then what about if we're having trouble getting employees to participate? So they send out that survey and it's just crickets. Any suggestions there?
I mean, as employers, we want to give employees a chance to give their suggestions, give their ideas. Can you try bribery and give them like a pizza party? Sure, you could do that, but at the same time, as employers, your job is just to seek that feedback, to show that you gave them the opportunity to provide that feedback. So whether it's in a town hall meeting or whether you send out emails or suggestion slips or something like that, just keep proof that you did that and try to encourage that participation. Is everybody going to participate? No, there's some people that are just going to disregard it, but just do your best to get that participation and give everybody a chance to, put in their 2 cents. That's the important thing, giving everybody a chance to contribute.
Yeah, what I've been saying is, make a few different attempts. So don't just put it out there once and then, not try again if you really get nothing back. And then if you don't, consider forming a safety committee where at least you get a handful of employees that can give some input, or taking a group of employees and walking them around and taking a look at the work site. Is there anything that they can point out for you that may be a potential hazard that maybe you don't see because you're primarily in management or in the office? So I think there's a number of different ways that we can go about that to get something. All right, so moving right along, are we required to have an anonymous reporting option?
Not a requirement. You're not required to have an anonymous option. You just have to have, it's just required that you give employees a way to report things, whether it's hazards or incidents. However, I mean, it could be a good idea. As we know, sometimes our employees aren't as open or as forthcoming with us as we'd like them to be. So having that anonymous option may be a chance for us to hear about hazards that we otherwise wouldn't, because someone doesn't want to speak up, or they're afraid to get somebody in trouble or to get in trouble themselves. So if you have that anonymous option, it could give you a chance to solve a problem that you don't know is there. So I mean, it could be like a 800 number. We at CEA, we offer that anonymous reporting option as well as a service that people can sign up for. So it could be something like that. It could be a anonymous suggestion box, anything like that. But basically it's use it as a tool, right? If you're going to use it, it's a way for employees to give you information that otherwise you may not be aware of.
Right, not required, but I do think it will show good faith on the part of the employer, and you're probably going to get more feedback that way as well. All right, so this is for Bill and Steve. How do we best prepare employees in the event of an active shooter scenario? What should our training focus on? What does that look like if you were to come, on site to help employers with that?
Bill, I think you're more versed on the active shooter preparation, but some of the things we have discussed is drills, like you mentioned earlier, like we do for the earthquake, fire drills, that helps you prepare. Also, if you have some type of in case of an active shooter scenario, you have some type of a unique alert to let the employees know that there's somebody, an active shooter is on the premises, whether it be an alarm, a horn, speaker system, whatever you have. But our training should focus on getting out. That's kind of the scenario that we always try to let employees know and employers that the best way in case of an active shooter is to just get out of the building. And we also recommend not to have a location prepared where everybody should congregate, because there might be a chance that the active shooter is an actual employee themselves and they know where everybody's going to congregate. So it's just get out of the building is really what we try to encourage employees, and stay at harm's way as much as you can. You've all heard of the run, hide, fight, but run is number one. We really would prefer that you run. And if you have an emergency action plan at your location, if you don't, you should have one. If you do, then kind of follow that too, because it does have the scenario on what to do in case you have to get out. Just always prepare for the worst. Bill?
Yeah, what I would say in the interest of time is that there's a lot of different pieces to it. But I want to emphasize what Steve just said. In over 1,500 training sessions over the last 3 years, I've had people ask me one common question, and that is, hey, if I'm going to be in your class, I'm going to be in it for 4 hours, or I'm going to be in it for a day, or I'm going to be in it for 3 hours, 2 hours. What is the most important thing that I can take away from it? And the one thing that I always tell students is, I'm going to tell you a lot about situational awareness and how to recognize threats and what might be happening in your work environment. But the most important thing I can tell you is I can teach you how to barricade. I can teach you how to fight. I can teach you several different swarming techniques. None of it is necessary if you're not there. And if you think about that, that's the most important thing you can learn to do, is be a step ahead of the curve. And there's lots of books that have been written about this. Some of the employers online may have read them. Left the Bang is a good one. You want to be ahead of the curve. So when a violent act starts, if you're ahead of it in recognizing it and evacuating and you're not there, then you're much better off. And yes, we can teach you all the other things to do, but learning where your exits are, drilling regularly. There's a very good story. I encourage everybody to look into it. Google Rick Rescorla and find out what he did in one of the Twin Towers on 9/11, preparing the employees in his company to get out of the building. And that was really all he did, was run an evacuation drill for years and years and years and years. And his company saved more employees on that day than any other company in the building. And that's the most important thing I could say, just to emphasize what Steve said.
And Bill, obviously, Safety Center can help out with actually coming on site, doing those types of drills, pointing out what things you need to be looking for when you need to get out.
Absolutely. We can teach all the pieces of it, but I agree, Juliana, Safety Center can come along and easily help you prepare for that.
All right. I think that's great for employers to know who are joining and really want to kind of bring this thing to life and make it meaningful for their employees. What are some of the biggest pitfalls or areas that employers maybe overlook as they're putting together their plans, or things that they overlook that lead to violent incidents? Bill or Steve?
Steve, can I go first?
Absolutely, Bill.
Okay. I feel like I'm talking to the best HR people I've heard in quite some time today, with all of you there at CEA. Wow. I'm very impressed. I'm going to tell you the best way I've found, and I'm an executive protection agent who is hired in, I'm a security consultant who's hired to come in and handle hostile terminations on a regular basis. I'm hired to come in and do threat evaluations and pre-strike evaluations. And the one thing that always I seem to come to, not always, but the majority of the time, is when the original hire was made, there were things that were overlooked or missed, or they were accepted. And I'll give you an example. A large company in Northern California, I won't go further than that, hired a person who was on probation for domestic violence. Looked at it, and their question about the domestic violence incident was, well, how long does he have left on probation? Well, it was 5 months. Well, they hired him anyway. And those behavior patterns showed up at work, and he was eventually fired, and we ended up with a hostile termination, and they had to spend the money again to hire people to come out and handle the hostile termination. And when they asked me what I thought, I told them, there are things you cannot overlook and you cannot miss. And that's one of the big ones. The second one, and I know Steve will have more to say about this, when employees do report, and that's what this new law is about, right, is reporting. We do run into employers and supervisors who seem to think it'll go away if I just don't say anything, or if I just ignore it this one time, or Harry had a bad day, and so he said something inappropriate, or he did something that was inappropriate, but it wasn't that serious. It's gonna go away. When you do that, you open the door for that situation to escalate.
Mm-hmm. So getting missed on that kind of first level of reporting.
Yep.
Okay. And yeah, with criminal history, that's a tricky one in California, since criminal history can be protected for applicants. And there's a number of steps and notifications in the process that you have to go through if that comes up. So it might be a good idea to consult with some legal counsel or get some advice if you do end up in that situation, because you're weighing kind of the various risks, maybe a legal risk versus threatening environment in the workplace. So it's tricky place to be for employers. We're also, I want to mention, getting a number of kind of employer-specific questions in the Q&A box from different types of companies, and I would really encourage you to consult with Safety Center and get some specific guidance to your business, because there's some questions that we just can't answer on a generalized basis, and it's a really good idea to have them come and assess your specific hazards. Emergency response is another important area. I know we're kind of running out of time here, so I'm going to go over this a little quicker, but we do need to have emergency response procedures built into our plan. So an effective means to alert employees to the location and the nature of the workplace emergency. So that might look like things like PA announcements, alarm systems, text systems. We want to be thinking about all of the different options, evacuations or sheltering plans. So both are encouraged in Cal OSHA's template. I think, as Steve and Bill mentioned, evacuation should be one of your number one priorities, and making sure that you have those evacuation and exit routes posted, emergency contacts posted, and then how to obtain help from staff or law enforcement if you have security personnel, or the building that you work in has security personnel, making sure that employees have that contact information as well. But again, you can consult with Safety Center or a safety expert to get more specific information and options for your business. We also have to conduct hazard inspections, including initially by July 1. You'll have to conduct an initial hazard inspection. This might also be a great time to bring in a safety expert to help you do that. Then you're going to want to make sure you're doing that periodically. The term periodic isn't defined, so you're going to want to decide based on the risk for your business. Is that something that's weekly, monthly? You're a small corporate office, mostly remote workers, never had an incident, maybe quarterly, right? So you have to decide, but decide that from the outset so you stick to it. After a violent incident occurs, of course, you're going to conduct an additional inspection, and then anytime a new hazard becomes known. So in my example, I said when someone gained unauthorized access to your building, that would be a potential hazard. So you're going to want to conduct another inspection. So determine the frequency, determine who's going to be responsible, and I would suggest that you schedule safety meetings around these inspections, because you might get ideas from employees on things they've encountered or issues that they see. So Eli, with that, what should we be looking for when we conduct our hazard inspections? Any tips?
Couple of different things. I mean, the first one, any imminent issues, has there been any threats made, or has somebody come and told you that, hey, they're having an issue at home that could spill over into the workplace? So we're going to, if that's brought to our attention, we're going to, keep that in mind when we're looking for any risks. The other one is look back to see any violent incidents that happened and how they could have been prevented, right? We're always trying to improve, trying to fix those things. Look at any suggestions that employees made. So as I mentioned, whether it's in the suggestion box or anonymous tip, or someone came and told you something, look around critically when you're walking around doing those hazard assessments to see what those suggestions are, where they fit in, if they would have worked. Any physical changes, have any lights gone out? Is the parking lot extra dark because, someone hit a light post? Is there a broken door, broken access point, that sort of thing? Make sure that we're looking for those hazards and a way to fix them right away. Any increase in employee disputes or disgruntled customers or that sort of thing. I know with the summer hitting, the heat, rises and everybody's temper gets a little out of hand. So keep that in mind. Do we have any more attitude than usual, any more issues going on than usual? And then, of course, as you're walking around assessing those hazards, always think, is there something else that we could be training our employees on, something else that we need to address, that we need to add either to our plan or just something that we could supplement it with to make sure that we're addressing those issues. And of course, we do these hazard assessments, as with anything HR related, it doesn't count unless it's documented, right? So make sure whether you're doing it as a group or individually, make sure you have a way to document that you did that assessment, what it was, what led to it, the date, time, and then if there's any resolution or any corrective action associated with it, make sure you document that as well and file it away with your records in case you get a visit from the state or something. You can show that you are doing your part to keep your employees safe.
Yeah, and it's actually a requirement to document that. So we do have that sample form in our toolkit. If you're a CEA member, you can access that. What are some of the most effective engineering controls that employers should consider? So just kind of on a general level, Bill or Steve, what are some of the kind of high ticket items you'd recommend that are worth it?
Well,
High
the
ticket,
training,
so
of
high ticket items, facial recognition, of course, but electronic access control. One thing I'll say about electronic access control, then I'm going to defer to Steve with his background at SoCal Edison, but just doing pre-strike and threat evaluations. Access control, no matter what you invest in, is only good as your adherence to it. So I've done lots of evaluations where people had electronic card control, they had cameras up. All of those things are good, but employees left doors open because of the heat in the summertime, and they didn't want to come in from the parking lot and have to open and close the door, so they just left the door open and blocked it open. So whatever you invest in, make sure that you adhere to it. And then Steve, I know you have others.
well, you pretty much you got it, Bill. It's just the entrance requirements and just like Eli said, the lighting and then the entrance requirements before you come on the property, whether it be somebody being able to see the person before they even enter the building and allow them access to get into it. But it's only as good as the employees adhere to it. And I think everybody's heard of tailgating, where they let somebody in behind them, and you never know, they may have been terminated the day before and are not supposed to be there. So things like making sure that everybody understands the importance of the access quality location.
So it sounds like training is really important in conjunction with those engineering controls. And I know we're kind of running out of time here. CalOSHA's template also has a number of suggestions for engineering controls that you can consider for your business, in addition to our toolkit. If you're a CEA member, we go over some different options. With investigations, going to touch on this very, very quickly. There is a requirement to investigate any allegation of workplace violence or related concern and record that on the violent incident log. There's required data that needs to be recorded. We also need to inform employees of the investigation results and the corrective action taken. So it's really important to understand the difference between your confidential investigation report. That's an internal document. It's going to have all of the information, like parties involved, very specific detailed info on who you interviewed, other documentary review or surveillance that you reviewed. Employees would not have information to your confidential report. That is something that you have to keep on record. But what employees would have access to would be the violent incident log. So CalOSHA has a sample that you can use. We've also created an Excel version, and it would have to have all of this required information on it. But the key here is that you must omit any element of personally identifying information. Remember, employees, authorized representatives, everyone has access to this upon request. So we're not going to include names, email addresses, phone numbers. I would probably omit gender or job title references as well. That's probably personally identifying information in most cases. So again, this is just your data, and the log that CalOSHA provides or the Excel spreadsheet will walk you through the specific information that you need to have on there. So I'm going to skip over this so we can close out here. What are the ongoing requirements that I need to calendar? So we want to remind you, at least annual review of your plan. You need to solicit employee feedback on an annual basis. Make sure you calendar that, and that annual employee training. So it's not just what we're doing by July 1, it's going to be every year thereafter, as well as scheduling those periodic hazard inspections and safety meetings. I do want to also remind you all that CEA has a DIY package, do-it-yourself package, available to assist employers in this process. So if you want to join us on June 19th for our comprehensive 90-minute training on the Workplace Violence Prevention Plan requirements, that is another way to get access to that toolkit we've been mentioning, even if you're not a CEA member. And some of the forms that it's going to include: an administrator checklist with your master list of requirements, employee survey questions, a sample policy that you could implement into your employee handbook, a sample reporting form, a training requirements checklist, that investigation report template, and more. So that is a really, really great value, and we encourage you to join us on June 19th to get access to that. I also want to remind you about Safety Center's contact information if you would like to have a consultation on how they can help you out with your business and your workplace violence prevention needs, including employee training options. If you're interested in CEA membership, we have a number of different levels. So we encourage you to visit our website at employers.org, give us a call. We'd be happy to speak with you about all of the different options. And thank you so much for all of your participation today. You guys made it really fun with all of your interesting questions. I know our HR advisors were busy typing away. If you didn't get a question answered, you're a CEA member, call into us. We are always available to you. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Anna, to close us out today.
Yes, thank you all for joining us live, for giving us such an amazing collection of questions. I know they're still active in the Q&A, so we'll keep it open for a few more minutes to just, hopefully we can get a last handful of questions answered. I did drop in the chat the link to the June 19th event. So to clarify, this is a live training with Juliana and Eli, and we will have additional HR directors in the chat as well, helping with questions. We will also be including that DIY toolkit, which goes beyond the Cal OSHA template. So definitely take a look at that event. There were a couple questions on how to connect with Safety Center. So workplace safety at safetycenter.org will go to their team. And then you'll also see a link to a survey. So if you would be able to take the 60 to 90 seconds, it's only 5 questions. And that'll help us make sure that we could continue to meet your expectations. I'm also going to drop it in the chat right now with trainings like this. So we'll share it with our partners at Safety Center just to make sure we are providing you with the best resources possible. Again, I will, by the end of day, be sending you all a link to view this recording. I'll also send a report, like a transcript of the Q&A, so everyone has a copy of that. And yes, and a copy of the slide deck as well. So look for that by end of day. If you don't see it in your inbox or spam folder by, I'd say, tomorrow morning for some reason, go ahead and reach out to us, ceainfo@employers.org. We'll make sure that you get that information, okay? With that, thank you, Steve and Bill from Safety Center and the entire team behind the scenes there. Thank you, Mary and Kim and our HR team for expertly attacking all of those questions. And of course, thank you, Eli and Gigi, for sharing your expertise with us. And thank you all for joining us live. We really hope to see you June 19th and reach out with any questions. Cheers.